Listen, thanks for coming on. And, of course, this is a big reason why I wanted to get you on, just from your journalistic background and perspective. There's been a lot of talk and chatter, as you know, and you've been all over the circus talking about the WNBA, Caitlin Clark, whether she should be on the Olympic team. I just wanted to dig into, from your perspective, because you're one of the ones that have covered and followed the sport for quite some time. So you have a better understanding of the growth, some of the pains, but also some of the, I think, the gains that have happened over the last 5 to 6 years. Where are we at in terms with the WNBA and its growth? And kind of walk us through kind of when you saw the change of it start to elevate.
So just to give everybody some background, so the WNBA was actually the first professional team that I covered. My first job out of college, I was a reporter at the News and Observer in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Charlotte had a WNBA team. They were one of the cities originally awarded with one. They were called the Charlotte Sting. And I was covering a lot of women's basketball at that time in general, because you had 3 very good college teams in Duke, North Carolina, and North Carolina State. They were all like top 10 teams at the time that I was working in North Carolina. So I did a lot of things in women's basketball very early in my career. And obviously, as I covered more men's sports, me covering it, I didn't do it as regularly, but always watched, always paid attention, always kept my contacts and resources in the league and in women's college basketball. So I bring that as institutional knowledge to this discussion. And so what I would say is that people have to remember, when the WNBA first started, it was like a huge marketing push. It was, you look back at some of what the games were drawing, because they were on NBC. Like, they were drawing like 1.5 million people watching the games. So it actually started in a really good place. And, obviously, I think there's been some ups and downs since then. But one of the more inflection points that doesn't get talked about a lot was COVID, because that's when you saw a lot of WNBA games and their ratings, again, took a leap. They had gone down. They took another leap, and there were definitely stops and starts at various points. And so sort of since then, it has been like a steady uptick. Now, obviously, once you bring Caitlin Clark to the league, things take off on a totally new, unprecedented level than what we've ever seen. I think it's fairly fair to say, like, she's the most impactful women's basketball player that we've seen in maybe generations, just with her ability to draw an audience, her playing style, which is totally part of the modern day playing style, the logo threes, something obviously that people see in the men's game all the time. We know how infatuated people are with the 3-pointer, given the fact that I think now we're at a point where people would kind of rather see the 3-point contest than probably see the dunk contest at NBA All-Star Weekend. So she's bringing all of these very new elements, to the game. And the WNBA is generating a lot of media attention that it didn't before. It always deserved to have this media attention when you look at the skill set, the icons that have come through the game. But sometimes the media needs to be drugged into covering something by a personality, by a rivalry, by whatever, the same way the NBA took off with Magic and Bird. It's very similar with her and Angel Reese. And so we're at a really good, healthy point in terms of attention and eyes that are on the league. The unhealthiest parts of this are the debates and the conversations that I think we're accustomed to seeing to some degree in men's sports, but they're now making their way in women's sports. But the difference is, in some cases, the people that are now talking about the WNBA haven't been there, don't have the institutional knowledge the same way they automatically have with men. And one thing that you see that is very much the difference is that, like, there are literally commentators who sort of brag about the fact that they haven't been watching and brag about the fact they don't know anything about the league, and that's considered completely acceptable. I can't get on anybody's airwaves and talk about how much I don't know about the NFL or the NBA. It doesn't work that way for me. But men are able to do that. And so some of these narratives and conversations are being shaped by people who, again, don't have the same institutional knowledge. Like, you don't have to know everything that ever happened in WNBA history, but you do need to know some key things that happen, the same way I need to know certain key things that happen when I'm talking about the NFL or the NBA.
Jemele, is it fair to say, excuse me, and you talked about this, the excitement in which Caitlin brings to the table, the timing of it, the 3-point shooting, kind of like when Steph got in the league, it was guys that were more athletic, that did more things, that were dunking the basketball, but because he brought something a little bit different, That's what the media tended to focus on. That was the excitement. Kids got into that. Is that more so the case with Caitlin? Because what she was able to do in college by shooting from the logo, it was a lot different than posting up inside or hitting a layup. Is that the part that a lot of people are missing from a marketing perspective of why she's kind of looked upon a little bit differently because she's viewed differently of how she played the game and what she brought to the table?
Narratives and stories matter. And I do think she has that same every woman quality that Steph does. Like, most people wake up knowing they will never be LeBron James. You're not going to be 6'8", and you're not going to be 260 pounds and be able to handle the ball like a guard and have the passing ability of Magic while also being extremely athletic. That is called hitting the genetic lottery. Steph is an everyman, right? It's like he's 6'2", he worked really hard. He was highly recruited. He went to Davidson. This is all part of his kind of underdog narrative and why a lot of people love watching him play, because they can imagine themselves working hard enough in their backyard, using their hoop, shooting threes from the street and beyond. They can imagine themselves actually developing that skill. They can see it. And it's the same thing with Caitlin Clark, is that, yes, you may never be able to have the footwork of Asia Wilson, the athleticism, but maybe you can be able to shoot from the logo like Caitlin Clark. So that's a very big part of the appeal. Look, when we're talking about marketability, there are certain boxes that you need to check. One, she's good. Two, she broke records. She's a generational talent. She plays a modern style that hasn't been necessarily highlighted in the women's game, because the women's game has very much been, it's actually been kind of a dominant big woman's game, right? Like you look at Candace Parker and Asia Wilson and the names and Lisa Leslie. These are the names that have dominated. And of course, you have Breanna Stewart and Diana Taurasi and others, and certainly guards have too. But a lot of what goes on in the women's game happens in the paint. That's where a lot of the dominant players have been. So there is something to be said for that. But it's also narratives. She's from Iowa. This is a place that, while they certainly have a basketball tradition, they're not used to being on the national basketball map the way that she brought them onto the map. And that in itself gives it an underdog quality. She's from the Midwest, and a part that's not always talked about as being sexy and cool. And, so when you have somebody like, I think it was Travis Scott that showed up to her game in Iowa, like that's a huge sort of cultural marker for this entire phenomenon. And then you add, as I said, and I know a lot of people thought it was controversial, but I don't think it's controversial at all, is that, yes, you check all those boxes, and she's straight and she's white. Yes, this all makes up for what is considered to be a marketing phenomenon for a lot of people. Now, maybe the more interesting question to ask, and one of my former colleagues said this, Bomani Jones, who's a good friend of mine, is that maybe the question to ask is, like, why did it take a Caitlin Clark for all of this to pop off in terms of the conversation, the interest level in the WNBA? And that's a whole nother discussion onto itself. But it's very easy to see why she has become the story in basketball America right now.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.